Hello and welcome back to Echoes of Empires. My name is Nick Holmes and this is episode 133, called The Rise of the Seljuk Turks. In this episode we'll look at why the Seljuk Turks suddenly appeared in the Middle East in the 11th century, and the first point to make is that they weren't alone. Several nomadic tribes migrated west at this time. The probable cause was climate change, as the Asian steppelands became unusually cold, and I'll come back to this important topic in a future episode. For Byzantium, it was a catastrophe. Indeed, so many new enemies appeared out of nowhere in the 1040s to 60s that many pious Byzantines were convinced God was punishing them. Portents of doom were superstitiously seen everywhere, from a major earthquake in 1063, which damaged the Byzantine city of Antioch, to the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1066. The first steppe nomads struck at Byzantium's northwestern frontier along the Danube. In the winter of 1046 to 47, a Turkish tribe called the Pechenegs poured across the frozen Danube in their thousands. They fought the Byzantines, who eventually allowed them to settle in Byzantine territory in modern-day Bulgaria. In 1065, a powerful force of Oghuz Turks, more formidable warriors than the Pechenegs, and of the same ancestry as the Seljuks, also crossed the Danube. They ravaged most of the Balkans up to the Byzantine walled city of Thessalonica in northern Greece. Fortunately for the Byzantines, they fell prey to a devastating plague and fled back north across the Danube. In the east, the Seljuks invaded Anatolia. The name Seljuk and the origins of Seljuk power lie with a man called Seljuk, who rose to prominence in the late 10th century. He was an Oghuz Turk, and at that time the Oghuz Turks were a group of nomads living around the Volga River. Originally from Mongolia, the Turks were ethnically similar to the Huns and to the future Mongols of the 13th century. Seljuk is first mentioned in the late 10th century when he led a group of Oghuz Turks east into modern-day Kazakhstan, fleeing from his masters, the Khazars. Entering a Muslim-ruled area, he converted to Islam. Although we know little about him, he must have had a charismatic style of leadership, for he succeeded in attracting other Oghuz Turks to join his clan and converting them to Islam. So much so that contemporaries called the growing number of Oghuz Turkish nomads who converted to Islam Turkmen, and that's the term historians also use to refer to them. Ironically, it was defeat that first put the Seljuks on the path to victory. In 1034, Seljuk's grandsons Tugrul and Chagri, who ruled jointly, Seljuk himself having died around 1009, were defeated by the Karakhanids, another Turkish nomadic dynasty. The Seljuks fled south into the Ghaznavid Empire, an Islamic Persian state in modern Iran. It was there they found the secret of their success. This was to rule by means of what amounted to a mafia-style protection racket. The Seljuks normally took control of cities by making them pay protection money, rather than installing their own government and rulers. They could do this because of their extreme mobility. They could appear out of nowhere, having travelled hundreds of miles in a matter of days on their tireless ponies. They were the masters of light cavalry warfare. Wearing little body armour and carrying a short, normally slightly curved sabre and sometimes a javelin, the Turkmen warriors relied on their powerful bows. The Turkish bow was beautifully constructed, recurved in shape and made of three parts: a thin central stave of wood, laminated with sinew on the back, and horn on the underside. This composite construction was designed for power and speed, with the warrior able to use the recurved shape for a powerful draw, repeated quickly and aimed in any direction. According to a Byzantine source, when a Seljuk warrior shot his arrow, quote, "The arrow in its course strikes either rider or horse, fired with such a tremendous force that it passes clean through the body." Equestrian skills were paramount. The Seljuks rode with a short stirrup, which allowed them to put the rider's weight over the horse's shoulder instead of squarely on its back. This gave them better control for archery and facilitated their style of hit-and-run fighting. Seljuk warriors hovered within bowshot of their enemy, peppering them with arrows, and when they charged, they would take flight, firing arrows backwards in the style called the Parthian shot by the Romans. They would continue these tactics until their enemy was so exhausted they could charge home with their sabres. If no such opportunity presented itself, they would continue to harass their opponent for days without offering battle, waiting for a suitable ambush or making surprise attacks on the enemy's camps or outposts. When the Ghaznavids met the Turks, they were unable to bring them to battle. The Ghaznavid army used heavily armoured troops, including elephants, a strategy copied from their Indian neighbours. But they were too slow to pursue and confront the Seljuk warbands. Yet, in order to win battles, the Turkmen had to fight at close quarters at some point. Finally, this happened at the Battle of Dandankan in 1040. Chagri, the main Seljuk leader, chose the timing of his attack with typical Seljuk cunning, waiting until the soldiers in the Ghaznavid army were quarrelling over access to a water well, and then he ambushed and routed them. The Ghaznavid Sultan Masud was killed as he fled, and the Seljuks took over the Ghaznavid Empire. Next was Western Iran. While the Seljuks at this time had two leaders, Tughril and Chagri, it was Tughril who rose to prominence by conquering Western Iran and Iraq, leaving Chagri in charge of the east. Tughril's invasion of Iran used the same formula that had worked so well against the Ghaznavids. He led his growing hordes of nomadic Turkmen to 4 cities to pledge allegiance in return for their protection. The Iranian political infrastructure was too fragmented to offer effective resistance. It consisted of a multitude of principalities, nominally subject to the ethnically Iranian Buid dynasty, but in fact self-governing and often in conflict with each other. The Seljuk style of government suited them, since once they swore allegiance to the Seljuks, they were left alone. In this way, the Seljuks allowed the underlying political regimes in Iran and Iraq to remain largely intact. But the interaction between the primitive Turkmen and the sophisticated Muslim populations living in Iran and Iraq was tense and difficult. The latter normally ended up paying taxes or tribute in order to continue their lives undisturbed. And while the Turks brought large numbers of livestock with them to boost the local economies, providing milk, meat and wool, there's little doubt that the local populations regarded them with fear and trepidation. Tughril knew this situation was unsustainable, so he instructed the Turkmen to leave the towns alone and kept them sweet by giving them the protection money he extorted from the local populations. This worked well, and soon Tughril arrived with his hordes of Turkmen before the gates of Baghdad itself, the great holy city and seat of the Sunni Abbasid Caliph. There, the fragmented political situation in Iraq continued to favour him. The long-standing Sunni Abbasid Caliph al-Qaim disliked the rule of the Shiite Buids. Tughril took full advantage of these internal divisions by threatening to take Baghdad by force, and on the back of this, the Caliph persuaded the Buids forces to flee the city. Tughril entered it peacefully in 1055 and was proclaimed Sultan by the Caliph. The Seljuks had come of age, but they had a new enemy to face. This was the powerful Fatimid Caliphate based in Egypt. The Fatimids were Arabs originally from Algeria who'd extended their dominion eastwards, conquering Tunisia, Libya, Egypt and the Levant in the 10th century. Not only were they the only other major Muslim power in the Middle East, but they were also Shia, so doctrinally opposed to the Sunni Seljuks. The Seljuks' main objective was to rid Syria and the entire Levant of the Fatimids. However, the Seljuks found they had a problem fighting the Fatimids. This was because the Seljuk Empire was built on a paradox. Its military strength depended on the Turkmen tribesmen, and yet these nomads had no interest in empire building. They disliked Tughrul's gentrification when he renounced the nomadic life and chose to live in the sophisticated and literate court in Baghdad. They disliked it even more when poets praised him in an Arabic language which neither they nor he could understand. But most of all, the Turkmen hated the arid Iraqi countryside, which was unsuitable for their flocks. Tughrul knew that to survive he had to manage the conflicting needs of the Turkmen and the Caliph in Baghdad. His power depended on the Turkmen, but their raiding and pillaging wouldn't be tolerated by the Caliph. Indeed, the Caliph regularly protested about their unruly behaviour. To retain the Caliph's support, Tughrul had to withdraw his forces from Baghdad in 1057. He needed to find grazing land for the millions of Turkmen sheep, and he needed cities that could be pillaged and burnt. So, where could he take them? The answer was Byzantine Armenia. In 1048, the Seljuk Turks made their first significant attack there. A large force of Turkmen, led by one of Tughrul's emirs, Azan, appeared in Vaspurakan, which is in eastern Armenia. The attack couldn't have happened at a worse time for the Byzantines, since the Emperor Constantine IX Monomachus was pursuing a policy of fiscal austerity and had disbanded the regular army in the Iberian theme, as Western Armenia was called. For the Byzantines, Armenia should theoretically have made an ideal buffer state with the Seljuks. Its mountainous countryside was difficult terrain for invading armies to cross, and it had strongly fortified cities in the form of Ani, Kars and Manzikert. Its population also had a robust military tradition and provided good foot soldiers for the Byzantine armies. But the Byzantines failed to take advantage of these opportunities. The main reason was mutual antipathy. Armenia had a long history of independence, having only fallen under Byzantine control at the beginning of the 11th century in Basil II's reign, and its nobility resented Byzantine authority. There were also serious religious tensions. Although Christian, the Armenian Church had never recognized Constantinople's authority, and many Byzantines regarded the Armenians as heretics. Despite this, initially at least, the Byzantines put up a strong resistance, led by Katakolan Kokormenos, a highly experienced soldier in the regular army. In 1048, he put together a scratch force of Varangian and Frankish mercenaries, together with what Byzantine troops he could find, and defeated the invading Seljuk army by tricking the Turks into thinking the Byzantine camp had been left unguarded. As they plundered it, he attacked them and sent them fleeing in panic. But the next year, in 1049, the Turks attacked again with a larger warband, and things didn't go quite as well. Katakolon couldn't prevent them from sacking the important Armenian city of Artsa. In 1054, Tughrul himself led an army into Armenia to besiege Manzikert. The city held out under the leadership of another good Byzantine commander, an Armenian called Basileus Apokapes. Byzantine morale was surprisingly high, with the record of a daring SAS-style raid by a Frankish mercenary on the largest of the Turkish catapults that was causing damage to the city walls. Quote, "The Frank galloped out of the city gates straight towards the catapult and threw a pot of Greek fire onto the fabrics that protected the wooden machine from Byzantine archers. The siege machine was engulfed in flame." The Frank escaped unharmed back into the city. In the face of such determined resistance, Tughrul conceded defeat. Byzantine-Seljuk relations improved when he took Baghdad and became preoccupied with the Fatimid opposition he faced in Syria. In 1055, Tughril made a formal peace treaty with the Byzantine Emperor Constantine IX, who recognized him as Sultan instead of the Fatimid Sultan, with prayers commemorating him at the mosque in Constantinople. So far, things seem to be going better for the Byzantines in the east than in the west, where the Pechenegs had occupied most of Bulgaria. But in the late 1050s, the situation changed. In 1057, Tughril led the bulk of his Turkmen followers north into Armenia and Georgia to stop them causing trouble in Iraq. Because of this, increasing numbers of Turkmen massed on the Byzantine borders. Turkish raids into Byzantine Armenia intensified from 1057 onwards, despite the official Byzantine-Seljuk peace treaty. Unfortunately for the Byzantines, this happened at just the same time as a short civil war in 1057, when Isaac Comnenus was made emperor. Their best troops were led away from the Armenian frontier by the rebels. The problem was that the Anatolian nobles stripped the east of troops to advance on Constantinople. In particular, the able general Katakolon Kokomenos was a central figure in the uprising and took away his troops, who'd successfully defended Armenia. The result was disastrous. Turkish warbands poured through the open countryside, and this time their attacks took on a new dimension. They bypassed the Armenian strongholds of Ani and Mansikert and invaded the eastern rim of Byzantine Anatolia. For the first time, Greek-speaking Byzantine cities were sacked. In 1057, Kolonaea was laid waste. In 1058, Melitene, one of the largest Byzantine cities in eastern Anatolia, was devastated. In 1059, it was the turn of Sebastia, a wealthy city and religiously significant, since it was the location of a famous shrine of the 40 martyrs. The Seljuk emir Samu, acting independently of Tughril and against his wishes, arrived to find that the city wasn't protected by walls. The Turks hesitated, unable to believe this, and initially mistook the many domes of churches in the city for the tents of a defending army. When they realized their mistake, they attacked, massacring its citizens and taking the rest prisoner. They stayed in the area for 8 days and reduced the entire city to ashes. The war in the east had entered a new and terrifying phase. Isaac Comnenus wanted to confront the Turks, but he was prevented from sending large-scale reinforcements to the east by the outbreak of war yet again with the Pechenegs in the west. Then his early abdication due to ill health in 1059 put an end to any hopes for the resolute military action that was needed. Despite this, his successor, Constantine X Ducas, sent some troops back to the east to stem the Turkmen assaults. Although the surviving records are thin, there is mention that the Byzantines defeated one of the Turkish warbands, killing its leader. By the early 1060s, the Byzantine forces in the east had been strengthened with Frankish and Norman cavalry, who at least prevented a complete collapse of the frontier. Nevertheless, it was now clear that the war in the east was posing a serious threat. As the Byzantines dithered under the ineffective leadership of Constantine X, the Seljuk Turks were getting stronger. In 1064, Alp Arslan succeeded Tughril. Previously, the Seljuk Empire had been divided into 2 parts, but now Alp Arslan, already ruler of the eastern half, united both east and west into a single vast bloc stretching from India to Syria. Like Tughril, Alp Arslan was a formidable leader, respected by the Turkmen and renowned for his archery skills. Quote, they say that his arrow never went astray. Worryingly for the Byzantines, within months of his accession, he led an army of Turkmen north into Byzantine Armenia. But a major war with Byzantium wasn't his intention. Instead, his concerns were the same as those of Tughril, keeping the Turkmen loyal and driving the Fatimids out of Syria. Byzantine Armenia remained a necessary diversion for the Turkmen. Indeed, Alp Arslan's advance into Armenia was a show of strength designed to impress the Turkmen, not the Byzantines. However, his actions had unintended consequences that would ignite a full-scale war with Byzantium. At least initially, the blame for this can be attributed to a man called Pangratius, who was the governor of the city of Ani, the capital of Byzantine Armenia. He was little more than a criminal, only interested in extorting tax revenues for his own use rather than defending the city. But he'd won Constantine X's approval by promising to pay him higher taxes, which he did by reducing the city's defences to the bare minimum. However, Ani was not just a wealthy trading centre, it was also protected by the best fortifications in Armenia and should have been able to hold out against the Turks. Indeed, Alp Arslan didn't even intend to attack it. This only happened because, as he was passing along the Armenian border, the incompetent and greedy Pangratius ambushed the Seljuk rearguard in the hope of picking up some booty. A large number of Turks were killed, which enraged the Sultan. He laid siege to the city. A group of citizens attempted to flee, but when they opened the gates, the Turks stormed in. The extent of the slaughter was particularly horrific. Quote, "They, the Seljuks, took the city by storm, and the slaughter of those inside was beyond telling, for no mercy was shown on account of age, sex, or creed. All were killed from the young and up, and a river of blood flowed through this pitiable and unhappy city." While the sack of this Christian city helped Alp Arslan to promote himself as the defender of Islam, he still didn't want a full-scale war with Byzantium. But the Turkmen did. With Byzantine Armenia now in their hands, they began to raid and plunder the rich cities of Byzantine Anatolia. There was one Turkish emir who was particularly good at this, named Afsin. He established a base in Armenia at Mount Amanus and gathered a large war band, probably several thousand strong. He invaded Byzantine Anatolia several times in 1066 and 1067, taking advantage of the weakness of the Byzantine defences. His actions went against Alp Arslan's orders not to cause a war. Indeed, he was actually under a death sentence from Alp Arslan for his unruly behaviour, which had involved killing one of the Sultan's most trusted commanders. But this didn't stop him. In 1067, routing the demoralised Byzantine border troops near Melitene, he and his Turkmen travelled a spectacular distance, hundreds of miles, right into the heartland of the Byzantine Empire to sack the great city of Caesarea. As described in episode 131, the sack of Caesarea was a step too far and ignited outrage in Constantinople, paving the way for Romanus' elevation to emperor and the resulting Manzikert campaign. And we must now turn to that battle, one of the most decisive battles of the Middle Ages. And that ends this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. In the next episode, on the 15th of August, I'll tell the full story of the Battle of Manzikert. And if you like the podcast, why not leave a review, tell a friend, or best of all, sign up to my newsletter where you can get a free ebook. Just visit my website, nickholmesauthor.com, link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.